Welcome to Concerning the Spiritual in Art, a podcast exploring spirituality, consciousness, and the creative process. I'm your host, Martin Benson. All right, welcome back to the podcast, y'all. Today I have the incredible collage artist, Jonathan Conda, on the podcast, where we talked about amazing sort of topics related to spirituality and identity. We talked about AI and social media. We talked a lot about his process as a collage artist and sort of how he goes about getting his images and sort of archiving, going through archives and various sources to source some of the figures that appear in a lot of his collages. He just had a lot of amazing insight to share. Especially, we talked a lot about sort of some of the contentious political situations that we're in and sort of how we traverse that and navigate this paradigm of like acknowledging our identities in separate ways, but also seeing beyond that to see our inherent unity and the importance of being able to do that so that we can move forward in our culture through this conversation that we are having currently around these ideas. He had just had so much amazing insight to share and just a beautiful soul, amazing artist. And we really connected deeply today on a lot of different levels. So I think y'all are going to really enjoy and appreciate this episode. So here you go, Jonathan Conda. All right, Jonathan, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Martin. Appreciate you.
Oh man, super excited to connect with you. I know we tried to connect to record like, a few weeks back. And as we talked about through email, life just happens sometimes. Sometimes life just comes in and says, nope, you got to wait. So, but here we are today, circling back, and super excited to connect with you. I mean, like I was just kind of talking to you before off, Zoom. Just when I came across your work, I felt such a deep resonance and power in the collage pieces that you do. And I came across it through the Waking Up app. So shout out to the Waking Up app, great meditation app for anybody out there who's into meditating and wants to explore it through those kinds of platforms. Highly recommend that one. And found your Instagram and just kind of dove deep into your work and just really fascinated by sort of what you do, not only like the images themselves, but even these little reels that you do, these kind of like meditations that you sort of like, kind of these like spoken meditations that go with your collage process, which I think is awesome. But one question I'm curious about that I think is a good way for us to dive in today is, you go by the Quiet Fight, like your website's the Quiet Fight. That's your Instagram handle. And I'm just curious, like what that means to you and where that came from.
First of all, thanks for all the appreciation. Really humbling to hear that. And that's what we do, right? We create things. We have no idea how it's going to connect with other people. So it's really cool to hear that. And I appreciate that. The Quiet Fight. To me, it's kind of an ode to those things that all of us struggle with as humans, but we try our best not to show. Taking a very infamous quote from Jack Nicholson's character in A Few Good Men, the things we don't talk about at parties, right? It's kind of like we all have those inner things, whether it be, and it can run anywhere from the range of just like suppressed effects of abuse to addictions to just insecurities and all of these different things that we constantly are dealing with, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. But it's just a quiet fight. It's a quiet battle within all of us. So you can meet someone on the street, they're happy-go-lucky, they're vibrant, this, that, and the other, but you don't know what's going on the inside. And so that quiet fight is just basically just a recognition of like, hey, we're all human. We all have some mess that we're going through and that we're hopefully working through. Yes. And just that kind of acknowledgement of that, because I try to definitely acknowledge that in myself.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful, man. It's such an important thing to note when we're dealing with not only ourselves, but with the world at large, to like carry ourselves with a sense of compassion and also a sense of like the reality that we don't really know what's going on underneath the surface in people's life. We don't know what's driving someone's reactivity or behavior, and to start to like pass judgment on another based on a lack of understanding is just sort of ignorant. We have to be able to give
Yeah.
each other a sense of grace and compassion, and a sense of space to realize that
Yeah.
we, there are things going on behind the surface we don't know about. And I think that's the mark of the human existence, is there is always, no matter where you come from. And of course, there are
Yeah.
degrees, right? Like we can
Yeah.
play a comparison game of one struggle over another, but on some level,
Yeah.
like your struggle is your struggle. Like there's
Yeah.
no way
Yeah.
to really define it in any other way. But like that's the mark of human existence. And I think that's that friction in our life is sort of what helps us. If we have the support structure, if we have the right kind of sense of connection with others, we can find a way to work through that and actually become better for it. Would you agree that like that's
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
part of the existence that we have?
Yeah, without question. And the thing about it is, interestingly, to me, it's a two-way street. I mean, it's a what sometimes happens is, as a defense mechanism, of course, as we know, and I know I've heard in some of your other episodes, we talk about the ego a lot, because that ego is that protector, right? It's out there and it's kind of like trying to, and then you have the persona that works along with the ego. So the persona is out there saying, hey, this is who I want you all to see me as, right? And it's kind of like we use that as a shield to kind of protect all of this nonsense that's going on inside of us. So it kind of prevents, it adds a barrier for others to actually see the truth and work along with that truth within good reason, because we know that many people will exploit that, or we at least feel that way. That's what our ego feeds. It's like, hey, if I show this vulnerability, then they're going to think I'm not fit to lead, or not fit to do X, Y, Z, or I'm not this, that, and the other. And so we kind of live behind all of these walls. So it goes both ways. Like you said, showing compassion to others. Somebody screams at you, somebody cuts you off in traffic, somebody acts rude, doesn't speak. Instead of jumping into the, like, okay, what was their day looking like today? What happened? What's going on in their life? But conversely, hey, if I'm not having the best days, sometimes it's okay to let people know, like, hey, my day is kind of garbage right now. I'm going through some things. You don't need all the details, but just know I'm struggling. So if I come off a certain way, don't take it personally. We're just living life, right? So it's kind of though that two-way type of interaction, I think, is very important. That kind of improves the environment. But it's hard to do because the society is built against that, and it's always been that way. I mean, it's been that way for millenniums. I was laughing. I was looking at what is it? The I can't remember the name of the artifact, but it was a kind of a king's record of their, trying to think, was it Sennacherib's prison or something along those lines, where it's kind of like these kings, but all the kings would do that from the ancient times. They would document their little things, and they would leave out all of the mess.
Make it look pristine,
all of the defeats, everything that they did, they wouldn't leave that, but they will hype up the wins and the victories, and kind of even like kind of expand the stories beyond reality. So that's just kind of imperfect human nature to kind of say, hey, look at me, I'm this, and no, don't worry about that. No, don't,
exactly.
look at this,
Put off those airs of perfection. And I think, to me, that's a futile effort, because anyone who digs deep in their own humanity just knows that there is beauty to our imperfection. Like that's what makes life worth living. I think this fact that we are on an evolutionary trajectory, not only of like our consciousness, like our soul, our spirit, whatever we want to call that sort of essence that's growing and learning through this experience of life. And when we try to pretend like we got it all figured out, like we've done everything perfect, made every perfect decision in our life, it's just going to hurt us in the end, because it's denying us our humanity in that sense. We're trying to put ourselves in some space of the superhero who has no faults. But that's just not the way things seem to work. And I find I connect more with people who are aware of their own faults and imperfections, and I see so much beauty in it. And it also, for me, it gives me like a sense of a ground of connection. Like if we can't connect on anything at all, at least we connect on the fact that we're both imperfect beings trying to figure this thing out, and we're doing it together in some way. But I want to touch on this. You brought up like the historic record from kings and how they kind of like scrub all their defeats and all their negativity. And to me, this kind of is a good segue into your work too, thinking about history and thinking about like how we can understand history through the lens of the subjective experience, and how the ego of these rulers or conquerors define sort of terms on what we think to be the history. But really it's not so black and white or clear as to what actually went down. I think of this line from the movie Braveheart, in this old movie, where like he says like history is written by those who kill heroes. And so it makes me think a lot about like what's left out of history, and is our understanding of it really accurate. And so when I look at your work, your collage work, I mean, you deal with the explorations and historical figures and sort of different sort of cultural icons, and also coupling those with some beautiful metaphorical symbols through natural materials or even certain landscapes, or even kind of like these geometric glyphs in some sense. And so I'm curious, like, how you feel about this idea of history and our understanding of it in relation to even like some of the work that you're making, because I think that's, from my understanding, that seems to be some of the subject matter you seem to be interested in.
Definitely. More so how history was recorded, and you can kind of go up into the deep end. I am by I guess when I take like the personality test and things like that, I'm INFPT. So I'm like I'm that mediator. I'm like, I see both sides of the battle sometimes, and most of the time. And so with most analyses like that, it is always you're wrong. What I found is right. But when you really look at history in and of itself, you see that there's garbage on both sides. You see that and the world is just full of these ongoing conflicts and struggles. For myself, my work is less historical based and more based on narrative, because of what's reported in history, right? So there was a time where, especially like amongst, members of the African diaspora, like there were these exploitive books that kind of just, talked about like, hey, look at all of these, weird people over here, and look at how they don't do anything. They hunt in the woods, and they, it was just their jungle and this, that, and the other, and kind of cast a certain level of wonder, to the uninitiated. And there was no way to fact check. There was no way to see the balance of what these people were about. And so extracting those images and looking at them in their own right, and knowing that, hey, these people were beautiful, or because of this person here, like who knows how many hundreds of people exist now because of this individual's so kind of extracting them from that original narrative and kind of recasting them in this beautiful light. That seems to be like more my thing. History is subjective because none of us were there.
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
So I can, and now, especially with the information being so abundant and everybody being able to create information and quote unquote content and stuff like this, anybody can have a cinematic video and sound authoritative and, speak with confidence, and they can be totally wrong or totally misleading, right? But it sounds so convincing. I mean, that's media, right? That's been the struggle with media since its inception. So to me, it's more of a balanced understanding of, there was some good, there was some bad. There's a constant, there's this constant shifting of, because people at the end of the day, we're all people, and people have those exact same things. There's no one nation or race of people that is 100% pure and righteous. Just doesn't exist.
Yes, exactly.
So there may be a conflict between these two groups of people, but you say, okay, well, these people are right. And then you start looking at their political activity and the way that they treat each other, and you're like, oh my goodness, it stinks over there too, and it stinks over here. So, not to be defeatist or not to be extremely negative, but that's just the reality of life. So kind of exposing some of that, I guess, is my goal, or at least speaking to it. We weren't there.
Are there any stories, like any figures, like within some of the work that you made, or any stories that you've like learned about that like blew your mind open about like certain notions in history? I know like maybe there's, because you explore a lot of these different individuals sometimes, like,
Yeah.
is there anyone that stands out to you, like some storyline that you want to share that really inspired you or kind of like changed the way you thought about a certain historical moment?
That's an interesting question. And the interesting thing about it is the majority of the figures in my art are anonymous. Nobody knows who they were.
Yeah.
They were just they were photographs taken during the, uh, explorations of different lands and things of that nature, just documenting for scientific documentation or for textbooks and things like that.
Yeah.
Very few of them were actually were actually like, documented historical, like this is so and so from, this area.
Mm-hmm.
So most of my insight comes from just personal study outside of art, the world of art, and I think it's kind of shaped my perception. You kind of, even within my own family's narrative, one thing that I'm fortunate to have is I have an uncle who was very into family history and very honest about family history and where our family comes from and the dynamics that shape who we are. I have a cousin who was a extraordinary food historian, and he has kind of gone through and like really picked apart a lot of these things through the avenue of the culinary side of things, but actually using that as a portal to kind of open up, like, look at all these influences that affect us. So that being said, I mean, I'm constantly learning different things about I think it's interesting now we're in this era where we're starting to connect the things that we refer to as culture to actual like traumatic experiences that happened, and how like these things kind of echo through generation to generation, even without us even knowing it or understanding it. And so, just different things, it's, the Afro-American experience is very nuanced. It's a very distinct culture. And just seeing like different things that we do and different things that are, and I say we in a very general sense, because again, we're not all, but you kind of have these characteristics just amongst the culture, right? And it's kind of like these things that you see, and it's like you learn, like, okay, back in these times, we acted this way because of this negative circumstance, but we now is part of our culture, it's and to be honest with you, like I'm being kind of to be honest with you, and if I'm being 100% transparent, I'm being a little evasive right now. I do have specifics, but it starts getting into the realm of like things that, especially around the times of slavery and things like that, which tends to be a very how can I put it, very controversial topic, not in the sense of what it is, but in the sense of this quote unquote lack of documentation, which routes back to what we were just speaking about before. It's
scrubbing it out.
Exactly. It's like who, and then it's like, okay, so, and then even if I'm being honest and fair on the other side of things, if we were to find documentation on that and these different things, who knows what their mindset was and their slant is. So it's kind of like there's just this weird complexity to it that I tend to stay away from. Simply because and I get a little bit of a kickback from that, from some of the folks that like appreciate my art, and they're kind of like, why don't you get more involved, and why don't you get more into, and it's just, to me, it's not my place. My place is, my goal is just to normalize humanity. Like, when I first kind of got a little bit of things, it was kind of like, hey, well, somebody wrote up a little thing and they were like, up and coming Black artist. And I'm like, why do I need to have that designation? Why can't I just be an up and coming collage artist? Or why can't I be defined by my medium or my region or where I am geographically? Why is it this? Oh, he does pictures of African women, so he's a Black artist, So that's what I loved about the Waking Up opportunity, is because it neutralized all of that, because it was literally just me speaking from the inside, these abstract concepts of, and I was able to kind of get outside of that and say, okay, we're artists here. We're not all of these little.
No, this is interesting. Well, this is very interesting territory to really discuss, because we don't, in the mainstream, we don't see us discuss the nuances of these very important topics that are being discussed around identity, around equity, inclusion, around racism, our history, right? Our generational trauma that's passed down through, even DNA in some sense, when we look at epigenetics, right? Like we are working out our ancestors' trauma in some way. It's encoded in us just on the DNA level. But the nuances of identity are really interesting in this time. And we can, if you want to explore that, we can go there a little bit. Cause me being like, I think about this, like I'm sort of labeled as a white person, but when I think about my actual history, I'm part Iranian, Eastern European, Slavic, like I'm Jewish. Is that really defining of who I am? And I understand that I can present this way. And so in certain arenas or circumstances, of course, there's going to be sort of like certain biases and ways in which that I could be treated differently. And I think that's terrible, but that's also something we have to be aware of. And those conversations are important. But that being said, to reify the separation, the sense of like to define someone based on those terms, like you just spoke about someone referring to you as a Black collage artist as opposed to an artist, to me, that sort of reifies the separate narrative, the separatist narrative. And as we do that, we're not going to get through to the sense of our inherent unity to get beyond that. Like, yes, we have to acknowledge these things exist, that these cultural conditions and biases and these atrocities of humanity happened, and that they're still feeling the ripple effects today in the way people treat each other. But we also have to look beyond it too at the same time. And it's a very nuanced conversation we need to have around that, because in order to get beyond the labels, we first have to accept that we've created them in the first place, right? Like that we're making all this up at the end of the day. If we really understand the condition of humanity, like we were talking about at the very beginning, right? Like the struggle of life, the quiet fight, like this is what unites us. Like we are the imperfect notion of our beingness is enough. And so I always circle my mind back to this place of dignity, of inherent dignity that everybody deserves, no matter who they are, where they come from, what they look like, what their family's history is, what their personal history is. Like just at the basic level of our existence, the fact that here you are, here I am, like you deserve as much dignity as any other human on the planet, regardless. And we have to get to that point. But I think we still have a lot of working out, because I think in some sense, we think about like power structures that sort of control a lot of the way our culture and society is moving. They really thrive off separation. That creates a paradigm for control. Like it's just a part of like the whole adage, divide and conquer. So as people, we need to find our unity more than ever, and especially in these very contentious, politically divisive times. So I appreciate like what you're bringing up in your own personal experience. And so I guess a question I want to throw back at you is, so how from your perspective as a Black man, how do we navigate those conversations so that we can acknowledge the difference in the same breath that we can accept and acknowledge our inherent unity, so we can move beyond these labels that we attribute to each other? Because I think we still have a way to go.
Yeah. That is an extremely complex
I know. So hard
question to a degree, but so
maybe just speak to it from your like own personal experience, because like you can't speak for everybody. Like you just speak as Jonathan, like what you see in your sort of window in the world.
Yeah. So there's a couple of dynamics for me that kind of shape that. So from a personal standpoint, my parents, my mother especially, was very, very cultured and very well traveled. She lived when she was growing up, she lived in London, she lived in Germany, she lived in Kenya, she lived in several regions of the United States. And it was because of her father, my grandfather, worked with the United Nations, and I believe he was with the Department of Agriculture. And so because of that, he was kind of like working with these different nations, and they would move, and she absorbed those experiences. she had German boyfriends and all that kind of good stuff. She did her thing. She was a beautiful woman. So that being said, I was always kind of fed from childhood that there's more to life other than the block that I lived on, the neighborhood that I lived on, the city I lived in, the country I was living in. Like there's this world out there with all of these different nuances and these amazing things, and the reality of the fact that because of who I am, even though you might highly appreciate and want to fit into these other things or accept these other things, it's not going to be as easy as just that. Yeah. And especially at the level that I would want to connect to these cultures. One of the most heartbreaking things for me is if I meet someone of a different culture and I have some even familiarity with that culture, but they kind of write it off as kind of like, oh, you're just trying to, do this for Instagram or whatever the case might be, right? And it's like, because it's just like, oh, it's cool because like, hey, look at me, I'm cultured, I can this, that, and the other. That breaks my heart because I love people. I really love the nuance of culture and that. And eventually I can break through that is usually through food or music. Those are the two things. But kind of to circle back to what you said. So I say that to say that it varies. Not everyone has had that type of upbringing. Yeah. Many people have had an upbringing where it's just kind of like, this is your world, this is who you associate with, this is who are, the neighborhoods and many around the world, places where people live are usually exclusive to certain race, certain culture, certain economic status. They don't get a chance to see anything else. And so now you're an adult and you see something and you're all this time you've been programmed to like, oh yeah, you're different, or you're this, or you're that, right? And trust, I grew up in south suburbs of Chicago, and I am, for point of reference, I'm 49 years old. So when I was there, I mean, intense segregation as far as like where the neighborhood lines were in. You could cross the street and like, okay, that's where the Italian Americans live. This is where the Mexicans live. This is where the Puerto Ricans live. This, it was very defined. So many people don't escape that bubble. So another thing that contributes to, like, from a spiritual standpoint, the way that I worship, just in all transparency, I'm worship as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. If anybody knows anything about us, we are everywhere. We are global. And the brotherhood is incredibly real. Yeah. I've been to Seoul, Korea, and have instant bonds, instant like beautiful friendships with brothers and sisters out there. Spain, anywhere that I go, like literally I can catch my brothers. Now we're human. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's still like there's still some things that even I've had to work through and still have to work through in my experience. Same as my brothers and sisters, but at the same time, again, it's opened up this worldview of like, hey, we're kind of all the same. They have these little nuances in culture, but we love our families. We want the best for ourselves. We want peace. We want to be able to provide for ourselves. It's just these basic building blocks of humanity. So what you said is interesting. I know I'm kind of like giving you a lot of context, but
no, it's good. It's important.
When I see a lot of political and policy driven battles for equality and things like that, I understand it. But at the end of the day, the policies, the laws, all of these things were made by human beings. To change the perception, you have to change the human heart. And that is probably one of the most difficult things for us to do. I can maybe help you one-on-one, but to change a policy does not change a person's heart. You change a policy, okay, oh, we're well and good, let's celebrate, let's have a good time. Guess what? If the lawmakers or whoever's involved in that, their hearts aren't changed, they're going to find another way to exhibit that. It's going to come out. So that's the thing. It's like there's certain things that I think are of a more of a spiritual nature than they are a political and or civil rights type of nature. It's humanity. It's like I have to connect to something higher than myself and look at that as the source of like, okay, how should I look at this gentleman right here? He looks different than me. He's from a different place. He's had a different upbringing. But how should I look at him? Oh, that's my brother. Okay, cool. Martin,
Yep.
you're my brother. Like, you know,
Yeah.
I have to have a different point of reference more so than
Yeah.
myself and my own experience.
Hmm.
And that to me, that's the key. Yeah.
Man, I mean, that's exactly how I feel too. Like
Yeah.
laws don't change the human heart. Like the human heart is
Yeah.
changed through direct experience with life. And when we can
Yeah.
penetrate the boundaries that we so-called constructed or believed in, and we get beyond those boundaries and we see our inherent unity. And
Yeah.
so like you said, this is a spiritual problem in terms of what we're seeing like on the political landscape.
Yeah.
It's playing itself out through the language of politics, through the language of
Right.
culture. But really it's a spiritual problem, and not spiritual in terms of like one specific religion or another, but spiritual in the essence.
Right.
Like if we have to define a term, when I think spiritual, I think it's about like this quality of aliveness, this beingness that is within all things, that is inherently the same. And it's on its like most fundamental level. And that's the ground that unites all of us. We are all here present in this grand mystery of life. And we play these different roles. We have these different characters that we play, but we are not the role itself. We're the actor. Like we're the one acting the role. And I think we tend to forget that. And so for me, this is why I feel like I've been drawn to the path of an artist. And I can imagine, I'm assuming that's probably why you're drawn to that path, because I feel like art is a medium in which we can penetrate those boundaries, those walls of language, of sort of like culture and politics, to get to the essence of the human soul, of the human spirit, and communicate directly spirit to spirit or soul to soul. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's where the change, I think, happens, is this recognition of our unity, of dignity, because of these facts. I think of like some things like the Dalai Lama like preaches a lot and speaks to a lot, is about like all humans, like what you were talking about, how like all humans like how, you know, want some of the same things. Like all humans essentially want to be happy. They want to be safe.
Yeah.
They want to feel
Yeah.
supported. They want to have their basic needs met. Like this is something fundamental. And so we're creating a society and a cultural condition on this particular planet that is not allowing for that to happen. Only certain people are afforded dignity, the dignity of being alive, of having food and shelter and access to health care and access to education, and the freedom to believe what they want to believe in their, and worship who they want to worship, right?
Yeah.
And we all ultimately are trying to find our happiness. And so I'm just resonating with what you're saying. Like we have to speak
Yeah.
to the
Definitely.
human spirit, and I think art does that, and
Yeah.
storytelling does that. Like, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
about how we can replace our sense of self with other. This sort of active experience of empathy is super transformative. And
Yeah.
we're not always afforded opportunities for that in our world because of our attention spans, because of our media saturated culture that
Yeah.
is so totally distracting us from the real essence of the issue that I think you're pointing to and I'm pointing to myself. So I think that's what art can do. I think that's the, in the idealist vision of art, like that's the tool it is. It is a
Yeah.
scalpel to penetrate into the human spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see
Seriously.
you
Yeah.
agreeing with that. And I'm curious for you, like in your own experience with your art making, because as artists, as I know, I make stuff too. We have this journey of like, is it working? Is it not working? Are we speaking to the people we want to speak to, or are we not? Do you have sort of a sense of experience where you feel like you are really connecting with your audience or a person? And what does that mean for you to connect with someone? Like, how do you quantify that or qualify that?
I'm working through that because, of course, not only am I is my desire to be an artist, my there's also I'm involved in the business side of art as well. So that kind of it kind of muddies the water a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
True connection doesn't always involve financial transaction, right? And
Yep.
sometimes, and don't even get me started on social media. Like it's such a weird vanity system, And at the end of the day, we're all employees of the platform, but we really don't see it. Like we kind of get drip fed these rewards. And I struggle with it constantly. So I'm not trying to be condescending and be like, hey, social media, blah, blah, blah. Every connection that I've had is because of social media. So, I can't actually degrade it. But to your point, every now and then I will get a message from someone, and it's sometimes just the most random things that or individuals, seemingly random, that just message me and are just like, this stuff is incredible. This piece here is really like, this is what I thought about it. And I get paragraphs. I mean, it's mind blowing because I am as we all are, I'm a work in progress, right? There's certain things. Sometimes I look at some stuff and I'm like, oh man, I did that. Like, that's incredible. And then sometimes I look and I'm like, oh, that's horrible. Like, and so that constant struggle. But to me, it's those individual moments of just like somebody across on the other side of the world. And that's what I love about the technology of it, right? It's kind of like being able to have that exposure. In art, there is, as with every, it's not just visual artists and music, it's in everything. There's a sense of, I don't want to call it elitism per se, but there's this kind of this thing of like empty compliments, right? Where it's just kind of like, yes, I'm one of those people. Yes, I appreciate art. And so therefore I'm going to speak to and you appreciate it, especially if it gives you exposure and things like that. But at the same time, it's not really genuine. It's just kind of this kind of mechanical thing. But those little personal moments that I tend to get on a regular basis. I don't have a huge, social media following. I'm just kind of getting my mind wrapped around certain strategies and things for that. And to what end, I'm still working that out.
Yeah, man, I hear that.
But at the end of the day, people speak to it a lot, and I'm grateful. That's just, it just amazes me. And like you said, just that's our point, right? To connect to someone's heart. And sometimes they feel something, they don't know what they feel, but they feel something, and they're just like, wow, like this is just really cool. I have to sit. One person just messaged me not so long ago, and they're like, I just have to sit with this for a minute. Like, it's just something about this. Like, I can't put my finger on it, but thank you for it. And I'm like, wow. That's my goal. That's what I want. So
no, that's such an important note. Because like the business side of it is tricky, and the social media side is very tricky to navigate. But like when you really like to make someone feel something, like I feel like our culture, and I'm generalizing and I have my own limited perspective, but from what I'm gathering, I think our culture has a tendency to numb a lot of emotions in people, to oversensitize and therefore numb people. And so when you can get someone to feel anything, it's a powerful experience, because it's that emotional sort of connection that again is kind of linking us back into the interior spirit, right? Like, so getting someone to feel something, even though can't really understand what they're feeling yet, that they have to really sit with it and discern, like kind of figure out what it is. That to me is such a powerful act, because it is like I was saying earlier, like it penetrates beyond the boundaries and the walls of like conception and sort of ideas that are limiting our connection to our essence or who we truly are. So that's such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I agree. Like when I get those kinds of messages or notes from people, it's like, it's nice to be able to sustain your life through your art in certain ways. And I'm still working through all that. And, and I probably always will be, because at the end of the day, that's just, it's a life path. Like I teach students art, and I try to like tell them that like, it's not about success or notoriety. That may come, but this is just a path of life and a path of learning. And like art is your path to learn and grow in a lot of ways. But I think when we can have at least that sense of, okay, like, you're doing the right thing, you're on the right path. Like everyone needs those moments, because we all have the doubting mind there. But to your point about social media, man, I feel the same way. Like it's a tool. Like we have to realize we are the product. Like you said, like we are employees. Like our attention is the product. And so like you have to temper your connection to it. But it is an amazing thing. It's allowing me to connect. It's like everything, right? It's got both the dark and the light. It got the dualistic principle. It's got both in it. And really what it's going to come down to is is how you use it. It makes me think of this old sort of Native American sort of what's the term you use, but just kind of like this analogy of like these two different like wolves inside of you. You have like the dark one and the light one, and like, and they're always fighting, and whichever one wins is the one you feed. So like we got to make sure we're feeding that light, feeding that positivity, feeding that growth and evolutionary mindset, and not feeding the doubting, the judging, the ridiculing, all that, because it's not going to serve us in the end. But social media is an incredible tool if we know how to like keep our boundaries with it. And I think that's something I struggle with, because I want to be able to connect with people. I want people to be able to hear these conversations that we're having. So I have to promote it and put it out there. But I have to catch myself when I get stuck there scrolling and looking at nonsense, numbing my mind, right? It's just numbing. So like I always am trying to dive into a book. I'm always trying to like find ways to counteract the gravity that's there. It's like a black hole, man. The closer you get, the more you get to it, the more it sucks you in. So you have to be very disciplined about it.
Yeah, it amazes me. I was thinking about this the other day. I was thinking in relation to one of my nieces, and just the generation she grew up in. She grew up in when she was born, it was she was one of the ones that could, 3 months knew how to work an iPhone, right?
Exactly.
And just so that's the world she's lived in from birth. People walking around with cell phones, people taking awesome, quote unquote, awesome pictures, and this, that, and the other, and this, that, and even like watching like television, or like watching like streaming services on TV, right? What happens if you watch like a TV show or a movie? Like they give you the option to skip the intro, so get right into it, and then they give you the option to skip the credits and go right into the next film, and it's just kind of like this compressed like force feeding of just like all of these things without the ability to just sit back and savor. When I was a teenager, I had to go to a gallery or get a book and see a photograph, and I had to sit with it, or I had to get an album and I had to sit with it and listen to it, and there's beauty in that.
Definitely.
But we're kind of programmed now to kind of take these things in a rapid fire, because ultimately, if we're just being honest, the corporations and the companies that drive this are making good money based on how much they can keep you locked in. So it's a weird thing. To your point, I love it in the sense that it's allowed me to make some very awesome connections. I'm super introverted. I'm not very outgoing. I don't advocate for myself a lot. So through social media, I've been able to kind of make connections, and it's kind of like people literally just like reaching out to me and saying, "Hey, man, can we talk? Or can we work?" And I'm like, "Sure, it wouldn't have happened if I didn't follow that route, so it's an interesting conundrum, but
it is, and we're all figuring it out. And
exactly.
What's cool is that like you are seeing a lot of people who are speaking out about these sort of negative side effects of social media, the instant gratification culture, and art invites us to slow down. At least really good art does. I feel like it slows us down. It kind of arrests us. It like when you see something, even like a great song or a great film or anything that is just has so many layers and nuances and depth to it, it stops us and slows us down. So I think art is kind of can be a counteracting tool for us, certain kinds of it, but it's tricky because most people are consuming art through social media now, right? Through quick images. So we have to be aware of that, of how we can engage our audiences in different ways. But I think that any sort of new technology that comes in, there's always going to be this time frame where we just misuse the hell out of it until we find some kind of balance through self-awareness. And I think that's where we're kind of at right now. Like we're starting to be aware of like, oh, this isn't so healthy, right? This isn't so healthy to live these lives based on perceptions of like these highlight reels that we see of others, and judging ourselves in comparison to what we think someone else's success is or not, because it's like we were saying in the beginning, like it's all these facades. Like how do we get past those facades and get down to the raw essence and power of like what could be expressed from one individual to another. And so I think we're kind of working through that. Yeah, but I want to circle back to some of your work and some of your collage pieces, because to me, like when I look at them, because you use a lot of people, a lot of figurative imagery in them, with a lot of other sort of metaphorical images, symbolism that's in there too, which I really love. But the way that you choose like certain people and the way you frame them, like there's just such this raw power in them, and the way that they kind of like penetrate, like in the gaze, like the way they look out, like a lot of them are like really like looking into you. And I'm curious, like sort of your process for how you source these images. I assume you're looking through lots of books, like, but I'm curious, like, are you going to like any like archives, like in libraries? Like, are you digging through things like that? Because some of the images that you're finding, not only like are you getting a great high res images of some of these really powerful figures, I'm just curious, like sort of your process, like how you find these images and how you go about telling these stories through your images.
Appreciate that. So that's one of the beautiful things about technology, is that a lot of museums, a lot of places are starting to digitize their collections, which is wonderful. And literally there are days that I will spend. I do have a limited amount of physical things, physical books and magazines that I'll source from. My thing is that I'm just now kind of getting into like just regular, just art prints for the sake of, wall decoration. But many a times I'm working with editorial pieces and things like that, where copyright is really a thing. You have to really be careful about image sourcing. So I tend to have always kind of fallen into places where I know for sure, hey, we're releasing these images, they're copyright free, that kind of thing, to make sure that I'm staying safe. So I can literally I have about, I would say maybe about, at this point, 7 or 8 museum library sources that I go to and just kind of just spend hours literally just going through, I know my style, so there's certain keywords that I'm starting to learn and trying to find, but they're not always reliable. But just really just looking at things that connect to me emotionally from a standpoint of nostalgia, and then also just again, like, like I love a lot of the scientific illustration, just because like it's this code, quote unquote, scientific textbook, but at the end of the day, someone actually drew that out. Someone actually, like, there was some guy, like, or woman sitting behind there and just doing this beautiful, and it's math, and it's symbolic of something happening in nature or whatever the case might be, but it's representative. It's so beautiful, right? And so you can kind of use that. And so yeah, I source most of my things from that. And then there's some like geeky stuff that I do on the back end to make sure that the images are high res enough that I can use them and they won't like blur out. So there's a whole like mechanical process behind just the romantic art part where, you have to kind of like, I'm on the laptop and I'm kind of like, clicking around and doing things with different pieces of software. And so so basically I'll just do that. I'll just spend a whole day like sourcing images, and then I'll check the resolution. I'll try to resize them as best as I can. It's like 300 DPI, export them in folders. And then I would just go through and just, I try to, I'm a huge, one of my biggest inspirations is music, and not from the standpoint of being influenced by the music itself, but like the thought process of artists. And ever since I was a kid, I love Vangelis, and he there's an interview, like old like archaic interview, where he kind of talks about his process and how immediate his process had to be. He hated having an idea and having to wait weeks or days or weeks before he could actually record it. So he had his studio set up where everything was right there and you can play everything live and kind of record at the same time. So that's kind of my thought process when it comes to like creating. Like, I very rarely sit with something for days unless I'm working on like something for a project, a client. If it's something that I want to do, like I get a subject and I start filling it with emotion and just seeing what happens. And you do that enough and you start to kind of it starts coming off as looking easy, because it does. It kind of simplifies because your
Yeah.
brain kind of knows, your taste and kind of what works and what doesn't, and things start coming together.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love. I'm very attracted to photographs of people who are looking dead at the cameraman.
Yeah, man, the
You know,
gaze.
there's one that I just did recently. I think I got my girl up here. This one, where the intensity of her gaze, like I joke with my wife all the time. I'm like, she is not playing with me right now. She's just like, and
Yeah,
just to wonder, like, what was her thought? What was she
right.
thinking as this picture was taken of her? For example, that particular piece, the original piece, she was nude. And I'm curious about, like, it's hard for me to, I tried to research based on her, the garb that she was wearing, kind of what area she was from, but it's very hard for me to kind of lock into it. I have a couple of ideas, but if it's what I'm thinking, that typically wasn't their dress even at that point. They were typically covered. So I'm kind of wondering, like, okay, was this exploitative? Did she know that?
Right.
Was she just not having a good day? Did she just not know what was going on? It's just kind of all of these emotions
Yeah.
that come from somebody's face, right? And it's kind of
Wow.
like, I just kind of want to, like, just lock those in. So very rarely will I take a photograph of someone and desecrate the face in any kind of way. I want the face to always be clear. Like if it's something
Yeah.
I generated via AI or something like that, I'll cut it
Yeah.
up. But if it's a real photograph of a real person, I tend to, like, stay away from the face and just kind of, because that's where the emotion is to me. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And like the anonymity of these people too, like what you spoke to
Yeah.
earlier in our conversation is so powerful because again, it's like comes back to this point of like getting beyond the personality, the personal history, and just seeing the
Yeah.
humanity right there
Yeah.
before you. And it's like raw sense, like just looking into you. And so when I look at your work, like I automatically feel a sense of like empathy and connection to these subjects, even though I have no idea who they are, where they're from, when they were from. But like there's just something about the quality of their humanity. So I think you just have such a great eye for curation of like finding these images themselves, doing that groundwork. I love the videos that you do on your Instagram page of your process of you collaging with you kind of narrating in the background too. I think those are so beautiful and so cool to see you
Thank you,
use, like
man.
the way you use your iPad, like just so like it looks easy, from the onset. But I know these things aren't easy, and that's just part
Yeah.
of art. Like artists like we've that struggle for many, many, many years to make something look as easy as it might look, but it's really very hard and takes a lot of time and effort. How do you go about like so you have like a figure you're working with, right? And then you're bringing in certain other kinds of images to couple with that. Are you thinking and like, because a lot of times I look at your work, it's visual, it's poetry. The way that you're bringing these certain images or flowers or certain structures or certain kind of horizon lines or like compositional elements into them. Like, do these things just kind of, are you kind of like playing with these tools intuitively? Like, are you thinking about some of these other types of images that you bring into work, like in as metaphor or symbol for other ideas? Like what's your thought process for that component?
I think there's a little bit of all of that. I have right now. I've always had a certain vision in my head as to when I first started doing this type of work. There were artists that I really admired, and you know, I love this element of this kind of, like, again, I use the word again, nostalgic element, where it's just kind of like something that feels kind of familiar and warm and kind of, so my color palettes tend to stay in a very similar range. I use a lot of deep oranges and things like that, and yellows and soft blues. And I because for some reason, why, I don't know, it just feels safe and warm to me. It just
Yeah.
has a warm feeling. And my goal of my art is never, like, I haven't made any pieces. I have done a couple of pieces, and the reaction was kind of interesting, that are kind of that are not very peaceful in their engagement, where it's kind of like you look at them and you're like, whoa, hey, where are you going
Yeah.
with that? But that's rare, just because it's just not, that's a very small piece of my personality. But to your point, yeah, I mean, it's becoming intuitive now.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been intuitive. It started with intuition, and then you have to figure out, okay, the technical part of it, right? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, I like this element, but now I have to think of composition and balance and things like that. So then it took a while for me to kind of say, okay, this
Yeah.
doesn't fit. This is too heavy on this side. We need something over here. And then I know different elements that I love to use, basically basic geometric shapes, flowers, like you said, scientific illustration, maybe
Yeah.
small clips of words and things like that, paper textures. And so, I try to balance things out once I get my core image. But yeah, it's a balance of intuition and
Yeah.
just the
Yeah.
technical stuff. Yeah.
No, I can feel that. You mentioned just a few moments ago about how sometimes you'll use like AI to generate certain qualities. Can you, because I'm fascinated with AI and I'm like, I'm not sure how I feel about it, but like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's like, okay, it's just a tool. Like any tool can be used in any way. Like it's like,
Yeah.
how do you use it? And like, how do you think about it in terms of integrating it into some of your creative processes?
That's a great question. What you said earlier was interesting about technology in general. I think you were referring to social media, and you said that we
Mm-hmm.
have to find a balance. Right
Mm-hmm.
now, there are the balance is up in the air. So first of all, we've been indoctrinated with the concept of AI from science fiction for
Yeah.
like decades, right? And so it's kind of like we've as soon as we hear those words, most of us will vilify it subconsciously because we really don't even understand what it is and what it
Mm-hmm.
does. At the end of the day, it's a tool and there's a human behind it in one way, shape, or form. We don't have completely autonomous AI yet. That's,
Yeah.
that's
Thank God.
the Terminator and all of that kind of good stuff
Oh,
is
yeah.
not, Skynet is not here yet. But
Yeah. Please don't come.
AI has existed for like decades. We just
Yeah.
didn't know it. It just wasn't at a consumer level.
Mm-hmm.
So now you have these computer systems that can um, examine external data and make calculations based on that data and come to a conclusion, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's the current controversy with AI. It's like, okay, wait a minute, you're sourcing and scrubbing all. So many artists believe that this AI is going out and looking at, let me look at Martin Benson's image. Okay, this is a Martin Benson painting. Okay, he does this, this, and that, another. Okay, I'm going to make this. I'm going to make
Mm-hmm.
it, and then claim it's mine. That can happen, but it depends on who's wielding the tool.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So for myself, how I use it is I try to create things that just wouldn't exist in the real world that are
Mm-hmm.
not. And I tend to stay away from any living artist that, I mean, there's some artists now that I think are absolutely amazing, and I would absolutely love to cut up some of their stuff and use it in a collage. And I've done so in a private, just kind of to play with
Yeah.
stuff. I would never publish them or anything like that. But to that point, things that I would use publicly, I tend to go toward kind of similar to the source material that I already use.
Yeah.
I try to mimic old photographs, old print work, things of that nature of just that kind of change the narrative again, maybe putting people of, I have a whole series that I haven't started working on yet of images with women of various ethnic backgrounds. I have Japanese, I have Samoan, I have different parts of Africa, Ethiopia, Somalia, and these photographs of these women that I've generated dressed in a very specific way, photographed in a very specific demeanor, and I want to use those as collage. So I can't find those. They don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at them, you're not like, oh, that looks like a such and such photograph, or that looks like, because nobody has done it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
why they haven't done it, that's a whole nother situation. Now, truth be told, I can go out and hire a model. I can go
Yep.
out and hire a wardrobe specialist. I can go out and hire a photographer. I can go in and hire a studio and get the same photograph and then cut it up later and use it for collage. Technology has afforded me the option not to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's, and you think about it from every aspect. When the drum machine first was popularized,
Mm-hmm.
people went nuts. They were like,
Exactly. Yeah.
like, what is this nonsense? Now, as a musician, I'm at home. I'm a great keyboard player. I need a drummer. I can't afford a session drummer. Hey, I have this thing here. I can tap out a beat.
Yep.
It's a practicality. It's a tool. It's not going to take anyone's, if it does take your job, there's some complexity there. If
Yeah,
it
for
does take
sure.
your livelihood or affect you to that core. But I get it. I get the thing. There are some artists out there that are getting ripped off, where it's just
Hmm.
like people are like, hey, make me a Martin Benson painting with such and such and such, and the AI will generate it, and
Yep.
they put it out on their thing, and they get all these likes and this
Yeah.
gratitude, and it's like, hey, wait a minute,
Yeah.
what's up with that? You know, so
Ex-
there's a balance to it.
for sure. It's
Yeah,
interesting. It's just an interesting landscape because like you were saying, like with the with the invention of like these different like with music and the what do you call the drum? What's the name for it? Like the thing that you're tapping out the beats on in there. I forget what it's called. I have a buddy of mine who's a music producer. I remember playing with his,
yeah,
but yeah, it's just at the end of the day, it's just another tool. Like it's another
yeah,
way for us to play and express ourselves. But we also with that have to be thoughtful because with AI, the way it does borrow images and kind of
mhm,
recreates things, you have to just be conscious
yeah,
with the way you use
yeah,
it. And at the end of the day, if somebody
yeah,
out there wants to make a painting that looks like mine through AI, go for it. Like I'm getting oil
yeah.
paint and I'm actually painting it, and there's only one of them. And that's just how I
Right.
do it. And you can do that all day. That's fine. Like there's room for all of us, you know?
Yeah, and truth be told, I mean, artists do that anyway, right? I've
Right.
actually gotten
Exactly.
asked for to do commissions where I'm like, you know, hey, we love your style, but we want you to do a illustration like such and such. And I'm like, why don't you just hire such and such? Well, we can't afford them. Well, that's too bad. Like
Yeah.
it's so humans do this already. Like we
Mm-hmm.
already borrow from what we've already seen, borrow from other artists.
Exactly.
We study their styles and then we come up with our own.
Mm-hmm.
AI is ultimately doing the same thing,
You're right.
except again, whoever's wielding the tool can direct it to not be so diverse with it, to be
Yeah.
very specific and very, and
Exactly.
that's the problem. So it's an ethical issue
It
there.
is. Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
computers can AI can outcalculate us, they can't outthink us. So you
Not
know,
yet, hopefully, right? Oh man.
yeah, not yet, not yet.
Right, exactly. It's interesting. But no, you're right. Like
Yeah,
to your point, like that's part of what being an artist is. Like we absorb our environment consciously and unconsciously, just
yeah,
humans, right? We
yeah,
absorb information all day, every day, consciously and unconsciously, and then it's fed back to us. And sometimes we're aware of where it's fed back from, and sometimes we're not because we absorbed it
right.
into our subconscious. But at the end of the day, like we are a filter, a medium through which this kind of energy moves and expresses
Yeah,
itself. And I view myself that way. Like when I'm painting or making work, like I try to like become some kind of channel for energy to move through me and try to get out of the
yeah,
way, you know?
yeah,
And to me, that's like where the magic of art is when you can try to get out of your own way and just be a vessel for this higher energy, power, spirit to move through you in some way. And for
yeah.
some people out there that might be like, well, that's kind of woo woo sounding, but like that's just my experience, you know? And that's just sort of
Yeah,
how I frame it. Like I want to, there's this creativity is such a magical component to the human experience. And I can't help but to think of, and I'll use the term God. Other people might want to use a different term, but as like the
mhm,
thumbprint of God, like the creative principle or essence. And we're expressing sort of a microcosm of this great macrocosmic reality. And to me, it's like that's
yeah,
how we connect to that through the creative act as like a form of connecting to God or to the universe or this higher power or source energy, however we want to define the ineffable,
yeah.
undefinable thing, you know?
Yeah, and of course, I mean that's how, you know, if you think about it, the earliest evidence of human art that we have, right? What was it? It was animals, it was stars, it was things that these humans saw that struck them with awe and beauty. You know, you see
Mm-hmm.
a field of gazelles running. I mean, that's one of the most beautiful things you could ever see, and you can't even recreate it. You can't even begin to. To
Mm-hmm.
me, there's art all around me, right? And so like you said, of course, I definitely believe in a creator. I've said that many times, even in my you know, social media feeds and things like that. Um, there's to borrow a statement from Joe Kenneth. He's a multifaceted artist, but he says his tagline used to be "created by the creator to create." So it's kind of like, you
I love
know,
that.
you know, if you follow the biblical narrative, you know, man was made in the image of the creator, meaning taking on those qualities, taking on the same personality traits. And the world around us is amazing. Oh my goodness. Like if you just stop and just look at things that we walk past every day, right? You look at a leaf, you grab a leaf off of a tree and just really sit with it and look at it. It's mind blowing what you have in your hand. Like the system, it's just like, wow, wait a minute, this is here. And I walk past it every day. The sunset, the sunrise, we never get enough. So yeah, like you said, it's just absorbing all of that. I say that a lot, that we are not, one thing that irritates me is when I hear artists of any medium act as if they are the first to do something, or they're the originator, or and I'm like, you didn't know. We can only give what we take in. Like you said, sometimes it's unconscious. Sometimes we don't understand that, hey, subconsciously, I'm connecting these dots here that seem this separate, but I'm putting them in my mind, and this is what's coming out. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm awesome.
Yep.
You're a vessel. You were a channel for that. And that's just how it processed through your filter, and it came out and it resonates with people. Awesome.
Exactly.
But it's an interesting thing. Creativity is it's a beautiful thing. It's and everybody has it,
Yeah, exactly. To me, it is the ultimate sign of the creator. And we can define, and this is where people get in the weeds a lot. Like, I don't care how you define that. I don't care how you connect with that. Like, that's between you and the creative principle. That's none of my business. But like that, the fact that like we have this field of material and imagery and experience that we can filter through us to create something new is just a gift. It's a beautiful gift. Something I tell my students a lot is like, to be an artist is to see what goes unseen, to notice what most people pass over, to be sensitive to your environment in such a way that you can see everything that's happening on all these different levels. Like, because like life is so complex, and we have live in our heads a lot, for better or worse in certain circumstances, but we can be blind to the majesty of just this reality as it is. To behold a plant in its totality, in its pure essence, is the most magical experience one can have if you're doing it fully and completely. But a lot of people just look at it's just a plant, and it's a leaf, like whatever. And I'm like, oh, but you see, like like what's going on here? Like it's so magical. So like for me, I'm always trying to live in a state of awe and appreciation for the mystery that surrounds me and the beauty that's inherent in it. Even though to contrast that, we live, there is going to be its opposite. The dualistic framework of life is here for us to learn from. I think that the dark and the light work together to teach us something beyond it, and that's even greater in some way. But it's hard to express that when people are deeply going through suffering and difficulty. And what we have to do is hold them in our heart and be there for them in whatever capacity we can as they move through that space, because ultimately these things do change. Everything does find its way forward in some way, shape, or form. But I think this circles back to sort of how we began this discussion around getting beyond the boundaries of our separation and into the inherent unity and dignity of our humanity, the quiet fight, the fact that we are all here struggling in our own struggle, but that struggle is here to serve us if we know how to frame it and we have the support structures to work through it. And I'm just grateful, you're doing that through your art. Like you're providing in some way, like you spoke to the people who reach out to you and certain times, like they're getting that sort of emotional movement inside of them. And that is helping, and that is serving this greater story that we're a part of. And so I thank you for just the beautiful work you make and everything that you're doing on your side of the planet. And I think we are compadres, we are working together. We are working together on this mission of creating a deeper resonant connection with the inherent unity that within all of us. And I think it's a tough road, but like we're in it together. And I feel really positive and really hopeful when I meet people like yourself. So I just want to extend gratitude to you for what you do and for taking the time to speak with me today. I feel like our discussion went to a lot of really deep, amazing places. And so everybody out there listening, you have to check out Jonathan's work. I'll have all the links in the show notes to Instagram, website, anything else you want me to put in there, you just let me know, and I'll add that to that. But just thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome, brother. I appreciate you for the opportunity. This was an awesome discussion.
Yeah, to be continued, man. I'll talk soon.
Definitely.
Right?
Take
all right,
care,
peace.
Man. All right.
Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Concerning the Spiritual and Art. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay in touch and in tune with all the amazing offerings that we're going to be bringing to this channel. Thanks again for all your support. Super grateful, and excited to bring more content your way. Peace, y'all.